You're listening to the ADHD Heroes Podcast, a podcast where we speak with the heroes of the ADHD community, namely educators, mental health professionals, and of course, those with ADHD themselves, to gain insights, tools, and most importantly, inspiration towards succeeding and thriving with ADHD. I'm your host, Rabbi Shmuel Reich, a high school Rabbi and an ADHD coach in private practice. Welcome to the show. Hi there. On today's episode, I spoke with a close friend, colleague, and mentor, Rabbi Dovid Kram. Rabbi Kram is a Rabbi in a yeshiva in North Jersey called Or Yisrael and a therapist in private practice. We discussed his experience teaching students with ADHD, his work as a therapist with teens with ADHD, the effects of ADHD on families in crisis, treating ADHD when anxiety and/or OCD are also present, and a lot more. Thanks again for listening and enjoy the show. Rabbi Dovid Kram, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on and excited for our conversation today.
Thank you so much.
Okay, so a little bit about your background and a little bit about what you do now.
Hey, thank you. First of all, Shmuel, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. We've known each other for so many years, and it's really a pleasure to be collaborating in this way. So I want to start by saying that the work you're doing is incredible, and it should continue. A brief introduction about myself. First of all, I got to give a shout out to my family because I'm very busy with them, my amazing wife and kids. That takes up most of my time, obviously. But in my other capacity, I'm a teacher and I'm a therapist. So currently teaching in a wonderful new school. It's called Or Yisrael of Tenafly. So we're moving to Teaneck, New Jersey. It's really a revolutionary new approach to education. And of course, there's a large spectrum of boys that attend our school. So we get to see really a broad range of students and learning styles. I'm also a licensed therapist, and I have a private practice in Muncie, New York. I do that most of the afternoon, and in between, just the way I got into therapy, we know each other for years. We were both in the same institution, and I was teaching in another place called Or Reuben in Muncie, and I just noticed that the boys would come over to me after class and discuss obviously the lesson, but also things in my personal life, and I was able to form a relationship with a lot of these students. But some of them were bringing up conflicts and issues that I really didn't feel like I was equipped to be able to help them. And I said, let me do it right. I went back to school, got my master's. I got my master's in counseling and clinical counseling. I trained under Dr. Jonathan Feiner after I graduated from university. Dr. Feiner specialized in OCD and anxiety. And now in my private practice, I really have kind of two tracks I deal with. One is teens in crisis. That's kind of my nature and my background as a teacher and connecting with teens, and also OCD and anxiety. I kind of really work with both populations, and some other things on the side. But those are my main two, the main two presentations that I deal with. Just a disclaimer, small before we continue. Everything I'm about to say today is really based on my own experience. My experience, my training, my strengths, my weaknesses, my style. So, I once had a real unconventional idea for a classroom, and I asked Rabbi Brody, who we both know. I asked Rabbi Ben-Zion Brody, who actually is also a therapist, and he's in education. And I asked Rabbi Brody, am I able to do this? So he told me a lesson I'll never forget. He said two words, and he said, "Whatever works." So I've really used that. The things that we'll be discussing today and the ideas have worked for me. Might not work for everybody else, but some things probably are universal. Others maybe have worked for my style, but I really hope that it'll be a productive discussion. And we'll be able to learn from each other. And one more disclaimer, just sorry, technicality is that I've only taught in all male schools, so I'll be referring to my students as the guys or the boys. But really, this is universal. It should apply to every and all genders.
Excellent. Okay, great. So from these different vantage points and teaching as a therapist, you've probably seen many different faces of ADHD, which is our main subject today. So what does that look like for you, and what are the differences between presentations of ADHD you see as a teacher versus what you see as a therapist?
Obviously, the goal of the classroom is to teach the class, and when I'm one-on-one with a client in therapy, we can really be focused on targeting the symptoms of ADHD and focusing on the treatment or the managing, as we'll talk about soon. So it is a little difficult to compare. Just one thing that stands out, in the therapy room, I can really adapt on the fly and to any change in the discussion. So, the ADHD, right? Attention deficit, hey donut, that old, I'm sure you've said and heard many times. So in the therapy room, I could really okay, let's talk about Dunkin' Donuts. Let's talk about donuts. In the classroom, it's obviously a little more challenging to roll with it. I remember in martial arts when I was a child, the instructor used to say that when somebody throws a punch, instead of just blocking the punch, take that force and bring it with you to throw them on the floor. Using that force. And again, it's a great idea in general to kind of use the obstacles as part of the program. So it definitely, in the therapy room, it's easier to do that. But also in the classroom, if a teacher is able to adapt to the challenges of the ADHD student and kind of bring it into the classroom, it could be really an enriching experience. But just one connection between teaching a classroom full of students, where, as if you Google it, there's probably 5% of the population has ADHD. So in a classroom of 20, there'll definitely be, based on the percentage of students with ADHD or more, as we're seeing today. One connection that really comes to mind is a word I just used, which is the word I use often in therapy, is managing. Anybody who comes to my office has some type of challenge, whether it be depression, anxiety, OCD, ADHD. And as a teacher, we're also managing a classroom. And it's very interesting, this kind of common thread between the client and the teacher, where just as a teacher has to manage the classroom, I also tell my clients that we manage our system, we manage our brain, we manage our emotions. So it is something that I keep in mind, that as both having the vantage point of a teacher and a therapist, I'm kind of using the same theme of managing. As a teacher, I'm managing a classroom, and I will actually use that often in the therapy room. And I'll say to the client, pretend you're a teacher and you have different types of students. So how will you interact? What's the interplay between these students? And really, that's how the brain works. There's constantly different things going on in the brain, and we're just managing them.
That's very interesting. I'm wondering, in the classroom setting, you're doing the management, whereas as the therapist, you're training them to do the management.
Exactly.
So would you say that that the client and the student approach this differently? Meaning, if you came into class and tried to have the student manage the class or make things happen the way they need to happen, I imagine that would look pretty different. Probably not what you're going for.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's going to take a lot of work, maybe coaching, as for the student to be able to manage what's going on. But it's definitely something that I think about often, and this connection between the managers of a teacher and what I've seen in therapy, which I wanted to bring out. But of course, as we'll talk about, each individual student with their presentations, and as we're discussing, somebody with ADHD will have to learn what works for him as the manager, as opposed to the teacher will have to learn what works for the teacher. But in a sense, we are all, just managers.
Right. Excellent. Okay. So what are some of the tools you found success using in the classroom with regard to ADHD? Because if I got that right, it does sound like it's more challenging in the classroom than in the therapy room, if I'm getting that right.
Exactly. Yeah. They're both challenging, and they're also both fun at the same time. It's just about adapting.
Yeah.
Exactly. I don't know if you remember, it's actually funny going back. I did a lot of trainings in my career as a therapist and as a teacher. But when I go and I talk to parents about ADHD, there's one lecture and training that comes to mind. It's actually a training that you gave to the teachers in my previous school, which we worked together. And there's certain things and it was so clear and informative. One of the things you explained, which I really internalized, and I think it's kind of the clearest explanation of what the ADHD brain looks like. You explained the 4-second rule, which is, I'll say it over. Tell me if I'm doing right. As your student here, tell me if I'm saying it right. Now, if the brain doesn't feel rewarded in 4 seconds, then forget about it. Right? The 4-second rule. And that's what you have: 4 seconds to reward, to give that dopamine to the child. And if the brain doesn't feel that reward in 4 seconds, on to the next thing. I use this all the time to explain to parents how their child's inner world, what it looks like. And very often when I use this explanation, this rule, that's where the aha moment. Oh, that's what it looks like. Aha, I very often get the aha moments from the parents, and it's very validating, and sometimes also very scary at the same time. 4 seconds, that's it. But keeping that in mind, there are two things I want to bring out. Number one is the structure of the classroom. First of all, a consistent learning environment is always very healthy. Something I used to do much more, I still do, is every day give out a lesson plan, which actually has the outline of the beginning, the middle, and the end. And of course, end is that keyword, end. It ends somewhere, right? Because even if it's a 45-minute class, there's something about knowing that the content has an end and a beginning and a middle, which helps with the anxiety that the student has. Is this ever going to be over? But additionally, and this is kind of speaking to that 4-second rule, when there's an outline, so every check, every time we accomplish a task in the class, that itself is rewarding. So you're kind of utilizing that idea of the ADHD student needs that consistent stimulation, consistent reward. And instead of saying, okay, let's talk about U.S. history and go on a lecture about the Civil War and the Industrial Revolution, you actually have a clear map of what's going to be the beginning, the middle, and the end. And sometimes there are 8 or 9 steps, but every single step, it's its own accomplishment. I think this is very, very helpful and sometimes critical to keep their attention.
That's great. I've seen those. If I can interject further, yes. I've seen those outlines. Yes. I think they're fantastic. Additionally, when the ADHD brain comes into class, like you're saying, there's the anxiety, but there's also the loss of interest. That if I don't know where I'm going, I don't have context, so forget about it. I'm done. Or just counting down the seconds. As soon as that brain knows where it's going, it has some kind of direction, some kind of context, you have a better chance of making things interesting. And making things interesting is of utmost importance. With regard to the 4-second rule, I can't take credit for that one. I learned it around. I don't know if it was Dr. Barkley's or somebody else's, but yes, it is a very good one. I'm glad it's helping you.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely helping me again in my office and explaining to parents. But I like what you just said, which is that direction, knowing the direction at every turn, right? Knowing the course. It's almost like having a Waze GPS through the classroom. So yeah, well put. One more thing that I just want to bring out. This might be a little more novel and maybe connected to the therapeutic side of things. But I will say that there is such a value to a relationship between a teacher and a student. We all talk about relationships, how important it is, but let's talk about ADHD for a second. And again, this is really going to be addressing both teachers and parents. Firstly, as we said, as we're discussing, the ADHD brain is reward seeking. So when you have a relationship with a teacher, when you have a relationship with a parent, there is tremendous reward in performing. And throughout the day of a student, they're constantly seeking the reward. And with the ADHD brain, its recess is generally more rewarding, and freedom is generally more rewarding in that moment. That's more stimulating than the classroom. Flicking your friend's ear is more rewarding. It gives you that 4-second hit, right? That dopamine hit. Now,
so they say.
So they say. So if your friend's ear, maybe just banging against the wall. If you have a relationship with your teacher, so all of a sudden, there is actually not just the reward of the content involved in the lesson, the reward of continuing to develop the relationship with the teacher and to maintain it. And of course, that goes without saying, this is with a parent as well. And one more thing, this is also in regards to relationship, as you know very well, being in this field, seeing so many students that have the challenge of ADHD, there often is academic trauma because the student very often does not fit in the system, and then unfortunately they look at themselves, they view themselves as a failure, and that gets reinforced with every teacher, with every class that reinforces it with the bad grades, the sending out of the classroom. When as we're learning more and more, it's not really the student's fault necessarily. It doesn't mean that they're a victim of this, which part of what is necessary in therapy and what you're doing, which we have to take ownership of and manage what we have. But at the same time, there's that reality of the academic trauma. Therefore, the relationship with student and teacher goes such a long way. If the teacher, after the class, goes over to the student and speaks to them about their interests, about the ball game, about what's going on in their lives, so that very, very often will help offset whatever trauma they're feeling in the classroom. And now their association with school is not just that reinforced, I'm bad, I'm a failure. It's a bigger picture. So just want to point that out.
Wow, that's really powerful. So you're saying that the relationship hits on two really important pieces of the ADHD. Number one, the stimulation aspect. And number two, the negative experience of being in school can be mitigated, or even better, reversed to be strong, but somewhere in between, by developing this relationship. So it's a really big deal. Wow, that's powerful.
Exactly. Yes.
So before we leave your classroom and go into your therapy office, what's a message of hope and some advice you'd want to give to a student with ADHD, and a message of hope and some advice for a teacher who teaches students with ADHD that you'd like to share?
Okay, great. So first, the student, I'm talking straight to you, student. Student, you're awesome. Your energy and creativity is a gift. You have everything inside of you that you need to succeed. If you learn how to manage these emotions, again, going back to that word, the management, you're going to thrive. Just believe in yourself. And it might be helpful to also get a coach. That's the student. But yeah, you don't have to go. All you have to do is just go a quick Google search of the advantages of ADHD to see how much you have and what you really could be, and you will be that. You're awesome. As far as the teacher, okay, I'm going to offer two pieces of advice, if that's okay.
Please, yeah.
Again, this is only from my experience. There's a viral video going around. I'm sure you saw it. And if you didn't, I hope I'm not ruining it for you. I never want to be that guy that ruins the end of a movie. But, here I am. So you probably all saw it. So this is just a review. There was a student who was constantly. He didn't say ADHD, but I mean, it looked pretty textbook. He was sitting in the classroom and he was antsy and he couldn't stop moving around. He couldn't stop moving his hands. And he looked dejected. I'm not remembering exactly the details of the video. And he was going from classroom to classroom until finally, after feeling like such a failure, one teacher looked at him very stern and said, "I know what you need." And of course, now another teacher that's going to give me, in his, you can see from his reaction, another lecture, another self-help book. And the teacher proceeded to take out a pair of drumsticks in the back of his pocket.
Yes.
And the next screen is him in front of like 20,000 people in an arena, jamming away on the drums, drumming at a concert. And it's such a powerful video, such a powerful story. I think every teacher could find their students' drumsticks. Like, what is it? You don't have to look at drumsticks as a future endeavor, even in the classroom. Every teacher could find a way of reaching the ADHD student, finding what he could add to the classroom, maybe turn the lesson into a skit, have him be the main actor, find the student's drumsticks as one. And that's something I've always tried to do. It's not so simple, it's challenging, but it could go a very long way.
That's amazing. Find the student's drumsticks. I like that.
Find the student's drumsticks.
Find the student's drumsticks. Excellent. Excellent.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. It will literally, it's that video. It's not me, but find the student's drumsticks. It relates to that video. The other piece of advice, again, I don't like giving advice. It's so not my nature because I have so much, to work on, but based on what I've seen and what I've heard, this is actually comes from a story that happened to me as a teacher. Once I invited actually a teacher of mine to give a guest lecture in my classroom, and he came in, and to my shock, the first thing he did was he called on everybody. Started with one boy in my room. He said, "Okay, so tell me what's great about Rabbi Kram," right? And he pointed.
That's great.
That was, and my heart sank, of course. And he pointed to the first student, and I'll never forget it. This student, not sure if he had a diagnosis or not. Again, an antsy boy. He was very successful academically that year, and I was sure that he was going to say, "Rabbi Kram helped me learn. Rabbi Kram helped me read better." And again, getting emotional. Without beating an eye, the student looked at the teacher, the guest lecturer, and said, "Rabbi Kram believed in me. Rabbi Kram believed in me."
Wow.
And very powerful. And I think that if you're teaching a boy, if you're teaching a student with ADHD, if they feel that you believe in them no matter what, that'll create that growth mindset, and they're going to feel they could accomplish anything. So just believe in your students no matter what, instill that belief in them, and they'll accomplish.
Incredible. Wow. That's really powerful.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. Let's move on over to your therapy room. So, do you see a correlation between ADHD and families in crisis? And if so, what is it?
So there are many reasons why a family might be in crisis. If a child is suffering from any challenge, it's not just the stress on that child, but the entire family is absorbed in it. ADHD can be particularly challenging to a family. There are times when, like, a child's behavior, as you know very well, can be so irrational, so impulsive. One of the main symptoms of ADHD is the impulsivity, and so self-sabotaging. How many times have I heard parents tell me, we were on this trip, that we were going on vacation for this child, and this is what we had in mind. Everything, the entire itinerary was catered to him, and this child ruined the trip because they didn't get exactly what they want at exactly the moment they wanted it. So it can be very challenging. Yeah. And I hear that all the time. So as a therapist, I think the first direction is the education, just to educate the parents on the nature of ADHD. similar to what we discussed before second rule, how the brain works. Well, if a child was physically stuck in bed with the flu, you're not going to fault the child for not taking out the garbage. So, again, we can't play victim to ADHD, because in reality, there are ways to manage the impulsivity, but at least in those moments, to view the child as stuck because the brain is stuck at this point. I think that's very helpful for both parents and siblings to conceptualize what's going on. And that's, I think, very healthy. And as a therapist, I do try to help facilitate what's the best approach to take with the child and with the family dynamic. So we strategize, we work with the child. That's kind of what I do as a therapist.
In situations of crisis with older kids, with teens, where things can be pretty complicated and pretty messy, do you see a role that ADHD either plays currently or has played in the past in getting them to the situation that they're in at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, it could be those simple stories which I just discussed, which I hear all the time. And again, that's an isolation. But think about what could happen after that child was in the middle of Disney World and on this great vacation and started tantruming because they impulsively wanted something, and everybody else in the family wants to go to this ride, and it could just fester. Additionally, we talked about before the academic trauma, what that could do to a child's ego, self-esteem, and the ripple effects that it could have on himself, and then of course on the family. So all of these things are at play. They're all things that I consider when I engage in therapy with a child with ADHD.
Wow. I want to ask, what are the most valuable things parents should know about ADHD at that stage? But you may have answered it already.
I'll bring out one more point, which I think that will be helpful. And it's kind of advice that I give to parents that I think is challenging for the parent, but ultimately very, very beneficial, which is something called modeling. Obviously, parents have to strategize. If you have a child with ADHD, then don't book a popular restaurant on Sunday night at 6 p.m. knowing that it's going to take an hour and a half to get the food, right? So obviously we're going to strategize, and I leave that to the great ADHD coaches like yourself to help talk to parents about, and to help manage the practical symptoms. But there's something else that I want to bring out right now, which is something I just mentioned called modeling. And let's think about it for a second, right? What's happening to a child that is with ADHD? They're feeling stress because their brain needs that dopamine, it needs that stimulation, needs that reward, and then they behave in a way which addresses that stress, which is the action, right? Which is the stimulation. Okay. And that stimulation can sometimes be very challenging. It could look like it could look very impulsive. It could be tantrum. It could be, but again, it's serving a purpose, as we'll see soon. So we as parents, are the greatest role models to our children. So imagine a child having a tantrum, and what's really happening with the tantrum is they're feeling that stress, and they need to relieve themselves, right? Find relief from that stress, and they're doing it in a negative, or what we call maladaptive way. So now the child's in the middle of a tantrum. He's online, and the child is going crazy. I want to get on this ride already. And then we start yelling back at the child. Do you have any gratitude? We just took you on this vacation. Now, have some patience now. And we lose our cool. So if you think about it, we're actually experiencing a similar type of stress inside of us as the child's experiencing. And we have an opportunity in that moment to role model what it looks like to deal with stress in a calm, cool, and collected way. And that's very difficult, something very challenging. But I sometimes think that it's very empowering to to tell this to parents and to work with parents on this, because they could play an active role in helping their children manage their own stress by modeling the behavior. So it's helpful on many levels.
All right. Wow. Would you say that an extra step or an extra thought would be needed for a parent to make sure the child gets that message? In other words, once the child realizes, hey, my parent is in a stressful situation and that's how they handle it, that's a thing I could learn. Hey, maybe I should try that sometime. If they're in that mode, mid-tantrum, they're probably not in that mode. But even not mid-tantrum, for them to internalize that, does that require an additional step and an additional piece of planning?
That's an excellent question. That's an excellent question. I tend to think that the children will be able to process the message if it's done consistently. And again, it depends on the child, but sometimes the pointing out how I behaved will be counterproductive. Right? Look how I'm behaving. Look how I'm managing my stress, and I want you to do that as well. So that could actually be, that could actually be internalized by the child as, you're judging me, or you're only acting like this in order to teach me this lesson, as opposed to
turns into another lecture.
And we know how children love lectures, right? So I think the best way to give over the message is just being consistent, and the less you say, the better. But that's actually an excellent question. There probably are times when it should be pointed out, but you have to be very careful and strategize. And that, obviously it's a case-by-case basis.
Right. Usually not in the moment.
Yeah.
Meaning if you're going to do in that moment, nobody wants to hear anything.
Avoid that moment. Exactly.
Okay. So we can get over to the other side of your specialty of anxiety and OCD. How common is it for you to see the comorbidity of anxiety or OCD together with ADHD? What does that look like? What does the treatment look like? And how does ADHD hamper the treatment of anxiety and OCD?
Thank you. That's really another excellent question, because they do look so similar and they are so often misdiagnosed, especially in adolescence. Misdiagnosing them could just be a technicality, or actually could be very dangerous if it's being treated medically. So it's important to really try to understand what they are, why they're similar, and how they differentiate. So, when I was an intern, at Jewish Family Services in Passaic. I had an amazing supervisor. Her name was Anna Kirschblum. And whenever I presented one of the cases that I was dealing with, she always started off, when responding to me, with the following question: what does the symptom serve? What is the function of the symptom? Every behavior has a function. So we already discussed with ADHD, there's a certain feeling of unsettledness. The brain is feeling stressed, and the impulsive act is really there to relieve that stress. So the impulsive act, the reward seeking, is really there to relieve the brain of that stress of not getting that 4-second reward. With anxiety and OCD, it's very similar. The brain is feeling stressed because it's feeling threatened, right? So the stress is coming from a little bit of a different angle. It's feeling threatened. It's afraid. With, again, oversimplifying things. With anxiety, it's an irrational threat. With OCD, it's more of a threat of uncertainty. But the behavior is also there to serve a function. It's there to serve a purpose. It's there to relieve my brain of that stress. So with anxiety, it's often avoidance. I'll avoid that activity. I'll avoid doing a podcast, right? Because I don't want to have that threat of whatever it is, whatever I'm nervous about. With OCD, the compulsion is avoiding the threat of uncertainty. So it's very similar in that it looks like I need something now. I often tell clients, and I tell other therapists this as well, that anxiety is when the brain turns a want into a need. And if you think about it, ADHD is very similar. it's turning that want to a need. I don't just want a reward. I need a reward. So at their core, they are very similar. It's just about the behavior afterwards of what it's trying to accomplish. So the treatment obviously sometimes looks very, very different, but at its core, the first step is pretty similar. This is a riddle I once heard from a therapist, Dr. Michael Adler. He uses this in session very often. An old riddle: John's mother had 4 sons, north, south, east, and?
I'm supposed to say west, all right?
Exactly. Everybody unless they heard it before, or I had one boy that never heard it before, but I'm not sure. So 99% of all the population automatically says west, because that's our automatic system. And then when you could slow it down, you could distance yourself from that automatic system. We call it like system 2 thinking. You could say John, which is the right answer, right? John's mother are 4 sons, north, south, east, and John, right? So I should have done it. The point is that at the core, if we could distance ourselves and be aware of those impulses, be aware of what's going on in our brain. When it comes to ADHD, my brain needs this, feels like it needs this, but maybe I could manage without it. I could delay the gratification. When it comes to anxiety, my brain feels like it needs to avoid this, but maybe I could, and then treat it that way. So creating that distance is very, very critical.
So how do you tease out the ADHD from the anxiety when they come as comorbidities? And I mean, it sounds like you have to treat them differently in certain ways. How do you identify what's coming from where? And when you're treating one, how do you make sure the other one doesn't get in the way?
Right. Based on what we just said, trying to identify whether the behavior is coming to, as I said, serve a purpose of avoiding a threat or a fear, or is the behavior just reward seeking? And very often with different questions and assessment, you'll be able to identify it more often than not. And sometimes we can't. And that's why very often psychiatrists kind of like flip a coin. Do I treat this boy with stimulants for ADHD, or do I treat the boy with SSRIs for anxiety? Because it's sometimes very difficult, and sometimes even the child or the client doesn't know himself why I'm acting this way. So sometimes it is very challenging, and sometimes it's both. That's what comorbid. Sometimes it's both, but ultimately, we can often identify why the child's behaving, why the student's behaving in this way. Is it for the reward, for the dopamine, or is it for relieving the underlying threat and fear?
Interesting. Well, so that's a really magical question then.
It really is.
Yeah,
more questions. Sometimes you have to ask it in different ways, but yes, exactly.
Right. Okay. Wow. So as we're wrapping it up, what's a message of hope you want to share with individuals who have the comorbidities of ADHD and anxiety or OCD?
There's hope. There's hope. There's help.
Sure.
This is very treatable. You're going to excel in life. Like we said before, believe in yourself. With the right help, the right support, you can be whoever, whatever, wherever you want to be in life. And I've seen this many times, both as a teacher, as a professional, in my personal life. Those that are able to manage the anxiety, OCD, ADHD, the symptoms well, often are the ones that succeed the most and thrive. So you're going to be great.
Okay, amazing. Anything else you wanted to say about the subjects we discussed today?
Just to finish off, and again, Shmuel, I just want to thank you for this collaboration, this discussion. I really enjoyed this and enjoyed the preparation for this. You're doing great work, and keep it up. One thing that comes to mind before we end is it's a parable I heard years ago. And just very quickly, there was once this king, and the king had one of the men in his country do a big favor for him. So the king was was indebted, and he wanted to show this person gratitude. So he said, "Come to my throne at so and so time, and I'm going to give you 3 wishes, right? Like the genie, 3 wishes." So the man came back and told the king, "Okay, I'm here." And the king was so happy. He's here. You saved my life. I owe you everything. So make your 3 wishes. So the first things the man says, "I want to be wealthy." So the king says, "No problem. Come back next week. I'm going to open up the treasure chest for you." Next, I have a very sick brother. I can't afford. I don't even have any connections to proper medical care. The king stops him right away. "No problem. You can have my personal doctor." And finally, the man says, I never had an education. I want wisdom. The king says, "I'm going to give you my personal tutor." Okay. As the man is walking out, he turns around and he says, "Mr. King, Your Highness, Your Royalty, please don't forget about my brother, my sick brother." And, sometimes in life you hear so much information, but of course, with the wealth and with the wisdom, on the way out, the king said, the man said to the king, "Please help my brother." So we're on the way out. We're finishing up here. We said a lot of information, a lot of the information about ADHD I happen to learn from you, which I'm also very grateful for over the years. You've taught me a lot about ADHD and how to manage and how to treat it. But the one thing I want to end off, just like with this man with the king, don't forget about the relationship. Whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, the most important thing is to keep the big picture in mind. There are going to be challenges that are beyond child, that are beyond therapy. There are things that are just in the moment are not solvable. But in the bigger picture, when you maintain a relationship with the child, whether you are a teacher, whether you're a parent, in the bigger picture, the child will be great. The child will thrive. They'll feel that security. And as you said before, they will often be the most successful of the children in the future. So, and that was my, the way to end. And I just want to thank you again for all that you do.
That is amazing. Really beautiful idea. Really amazing conversation. Thank you. It's always so much fun and so edifying to work with you. I've learned quite a bit from you as well. And this was amazing. How can people get in touch with you for some more of this?
How can they get in touch with me? I guess they can email me.
Yeah.
dovidkram@gmail.com, and we'll continue the conversation. I will be more than happy to continue the conversation with anybody who reaches out to me. So I really appreciate it. Dovidkram, DOVIDKRAM @gmail.com.
Okay. Thanks so much. We'll put it in the show notes. This was amazing. Thank you again.
Thank you, Shmuel. All of the best.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the ADHD Heroes podcast. For questions about the podcast, you can email us at adhdheroespodcast@gmail.com. Also, for sponsorships or to share your story, your ADHD story, you can also email us at the same place, adhdheroespodcast@gmail.com. To be in touch with me about ADHD coaching, writing, or speaking engagements, you can email me at rsreichadhdcoach@gmail.com. Be sure to check out my website, rsreich.com, adhdcoach.com. You can follow me on LinkedIn, or you can check out my blog on nefesh.org. Check out my blog there under my name. Important disclaimer: podcasts are great, but they do not take the place of mental health help or medical help. So if you need help with mental health or need a doctor, be sure to be in contact with some of them. Please, if you like this show, please rate, review, and share with a friend. That's how these things get out there. Thank you again for listening, and thank you to our producers at Pretty Easy Podcasts.